It was opening night for the Gonzaga Bulldogs on Monday against the Baylor Bears, and I'm not sure that we could have had a whole lot more fun than that.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win, just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Gonzaga has beaten teams by 38 points on opening night before, but it is rarely against a team ranked in the top 10 like the Baylor Bears, but it was an absolute demolition from Gonzaga on Monday late in the evening. We're going to talk all about this game, the great stuff we saw from Gonzaga's bench, the fantastic outside shooting. We're going to talk about some of the few bad things we saw, although there really wasn't much in this game, what it means for Gonzaga, what's next on the schedule, all that coming up. We're also going to close out the show, getting you ready for Gonzaga women's first game of the season, Tuesday night against Montana. Let's start just by celebrating what a fantastic, fun, exciting atmosphere we saw at the Spokane Arena on Monday night. It started a little inauspiciously, I should say, as we had the Monday Night Football game go into overtime, the most classic thing to happen to Gonzaga. It feels like every time they're on ESPN, the game before them is going late, or the game before that went late. So, of course, to see that game between the Chiefs and Buccaneers go into overtime was just classic for the Zags team. And then immediately after that, once the game got going, Gonzaga was cruising. 8-1 start in this game. Baylor did come back and take the lead after that, but once Gonzaga regained the lead, this thing was over. Starting lineup for the Zags: Nembhard, Hickman, Battle, Greg, and Ike. Not a starting lineup we saw from Gonzaga in the exhibition game, so I'm very curious to see how that shakes out. I suspect this is going to be the starting lineup going forward. It certainly worked quite well in this contest with Michael Ajayi coming off the bench. And the bench is really where I want to start this conversation. Last year, Gonzaga really didn't have the bench depth to sustain success throughout the season. Luka Krajinovic went down with the injury, but even prior to that, he wasn't really a consistent part of the rotation, and Gonzaga didn't have backup guards. They were relying on Dusty Stromer, but he went down with the injury and was unable to contribute. Dusty Stromer was thrust into a starting role, and we just saw a team that did not have the depth. Ryan Nembhard's played 40 minutes a game. Nolan Hickman's playing 38 minutes a game, and they just got gassed. They couldn't do the things that they wanted to do. That we knew that wasn't going to be the case this year. We knew that was going to change, but wow, what an incredible difference it made in this first contest against Baylor. Dusty Stromer, the Zags bench as in totality scored 35 points for Gonzaga on 17 of 25 shooting. Basically, missed in this game. Like Dusty Stromer led the bench. 4 rebounds. 3 of 5 from 3. I loved the confidence that we saw from Dusty. He missed a 3 fairly early in the game, got another look really, really soon after that, and did not even hesitate. That is not the kind of stuff we saw from him last year. That is growth for him in his sophomore year, to be confident, pulling the trigger on that shot, knocking it down, hitting 3 of Gonzaga's three-pointers in this game. Really nice stuff. He had some turnover issues, got a little sloppy with some of his passes, but overall, a really nice night from Dusty. And then you had Braden Huff, who did not look great in the exhibition game against USC. There was some concern. Graham Ike picked up some early foul trouble, and everybody thought this is going to be the issue for Gonzaga this year. If Ike is sitting in the first half and Braden Huff's unable to contribute in the way we need him to, that could be a problem. Braden Huff looked great. He still had some offensive or defensive issues where he got some fouls and he gave up some easy points, but he finished this game with 14.6 rebounds on 7 of 11 shooting. He was great. When Baylor would double team him, he knew how to get rid of the basketball. When they didn't double him in the second half, he just went to work, scored with his right hand, scored with his left, had some putbacks, just a really well-rounded offensive game from Braden Huff, which was something we saw from him a lot last year against bad teams, but we didn't see him have this kind of performance against good quality teams very often. And he goes out and puts up a monster game against a Baylor team that we'll talk about them a bit. They got some work to do, but they have good front court players. And Braden Huff looked phenomenal in this one. Michael Ajayi, like we mentioned, he comes off the bench as well. 9 points, 8 boards, 4 of 5 shooting. Mark Few said that he believes Michael Ajayi is the best rebounder they've ever had. That sounded hyperbolic, but here's the thing, guys. Mark Few is pretty rarely hyperbolic. He doesn't say stuff like that unless he doesn't mean it to some extent. And if you watch this game, you get what he's talking about. Michael Ajayi has a tremendous nose for the basketball. He is tenacious. He is physical. He goes after the rock, and he looked amazing at grabbing rebounds for Gonzaga. Again, he had 8 of them coming off the bench. He also had 9 points, a fluid 9-point performance from him. 4 of 5 from the field, missed 1 3-pointer, but otherwise was excellent. He had a block shot that he just pummeled, just a ridiculous highlight reel type block shot. Just a really nice game for him. He looked so comfortable in the role he was being asked to play. And to be at that level where you're already comfortable in that role and contributing in your first game when you're coming from a situation where you were the star player, the leading scorer in the conference, to be comfortable coming off the bench in a role like this, that's so massive for Gonzaga. It wasn't just the bench, though. Wasn't just the bench. Nolan Hickman, 17 points on 7 of 11 shooting. Graham Ike, slow start for him. Missed some bunnies early in the game. Even in the second half, he had 2 shots blocked. One of them was VJ Edgecombe, who's just a freak athlete, and got up and blocked one of them. The other one, it seemed he just didn't go up strong enough. I know some people were concerned. There was some conversation about it going on in our Discord channel, but Ike ultimately finished this game with 15 points, 8 rebounds on 6 of 12 shooting. That's not bad. 50% from the floor on 15 points. You're going to take that against a team like Baylor, against a player like Norchad Omier. That's a pretty good line, even if Braden Huff was a little bit more efficient offensively, even if Ike was a little frustrated with some of the missed shots. Can't argue with 15 and 8. Caleb Battle, 12 points, 4 of 8 from 3. Really got hot in the second half. Just hit some just jaw-dropping shots where you're like, how in the heck did that go in? How do you defend that? You just see the players who keeping their hands up like, I did everything that I can, and Caleb Battle's knocking down 32-footers. Like, what are we going to do to stop that? So just remarkable stuff from them. Ryan Nembhard had 11 assists. The Zags out-rebounded Baylor 45-32. And what I loved about that is it was a balanced rebounding attack. Ike had 8, Ajayi had 8, Hickman had 6, Nembhard and Battle each had 5, Stromer had 4, Greg had 2. Just really balanced rebounding, a lot of missed shots, but Baylor got some second chance opportunities, which was something we were concerned about coming into the game, but they didn't take advantage of them as much as they could have. And just, again, Ajayi was such a freak on the boards. Did a good job wrestling some away. Just a really quality performance from this team on the glass when they really, really needed it. Zags also had 25 assists compared to just 11 turnovers. Stromer had 4 of the turnovers. Again, that was a bit of a concern for him, but 25 assists to 11 turnovers is remarkable. And compare that to Baylor, who had 11 assists and 12 turnovers. So 1 more turnover and 14 less assists than Gonzaga in this one. Just an all-around stomping by the Zags of this Baylor team. They hadn't beaten them since – it's been a while since they beat them. Ben Gregg's the only player still here from that 2021 team that lost in the national championship game, but he said he was so happy after the game to get a W against this team. Just some phenomenal stuff. A few highlights from this game. We mentioned a few of them already. 3 straight triples from Caleb Battle in the second half. Just buried this team. That was when it really just got completely out of hand. There was a possession that I love where Ryan Nembhard got a rebound on a missed 3 from Norchad Omier, was bringing the ball up the floor, stopped while he was dribbling to adjust his headband, just the confidence to know that you can get away with doing that during a game, still drove, beat his defender, got all the way under the rim, came around kind of Steve Nash style under the basket, did a little handoff to Caleb Battle for an open 3, bang. And it was just like, this is the kind of night that this team is having. Nolan Hickman looked great, crushing some threes. Ajayi had a big blow-by on the baseline and a 2-handed slam. The biggest highlight of the game, though, came against Gonzaga. If you watched till the very end of the game, you were treated to this. Joe Few came in the final minutes, as he often does in these blowout games. We weren't expecting it against Baylor, but Joe Few comes in. VJ Edgecombe gets a steal, is coming down the court. He is in transition. VJ Edgecombe, the freshman phenom for Baylor, who really struggled in this game, but is a very, very athletic, very talented player, is screaming down the side with the basketball in his hands, gathering up for a monster dunk. And big shout out to Joe, because Joe stood in there, he jumped, he contested this thing. It didn't go well for him. If you haven't watched the highlight, I suggest checking it out at the end of the show because he got put on a massive poster. But I love that Joe made an attempt. He knows who VJ Edgecombe is. He knows what he's capable of. And he said, I'm gonna challenge the shot, and got absolutely posterized. Check it out. It's a lot more fun to watch when you know Gonzaga's up 35 points with just a few minutes left in the game. Well, folks, what does this mean for Gonzaga? What is it? Are they for real? Is this team this good? Their defense was outstanding. They moved up 20 plus spots in KenPom's defensive efficiency. Are they for real? Is Baylor maybe not for real? What do we got to say about this game here? We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, it's time for our Roy Player of the Week. And this week, we're showing some love to Nolan Hickman. What a great game he had. 17 points on 7 of 11 shooting. We're putting $100 on Hickman right now through Roy, the ultimate platform where you get to directly support your favorite athletes. So download Roy now on iOS or the Google Play Store. No middleman, no collective making the decisions for you. You decide who gets the backing, and it's as easy as just a few clicks. With Roy, you know exactly where your money's going. Roy gives you the power to decide who gets your support. Every contribution from fans like us helps keep the athletes committed to the team. And if they decide to transfer, you get your money back. How is that for transparency? So what are you waiting for? Download the Roy app today and make your contribution. Not only are you supporting the athlete's journey, but you're also helping to keep the Zags strong for next season. Remember, if they stay, you win. If they leave, no worries. You get your cash back. That wraps up our Roy Player of the Week segment. Don't forget, if you want to support more athletes and be a part of their success stories, Roy is the way to go. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about this epic blowout win for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs against Scott Drew and the number 8 Baylor Bears. Gonzaga was up 19 at halftime, outscored them by 19 in the second half. Just a dominant performance from Mark Few's team. And the main question here, how real is this? Because it's the first game of the season, and a lot of the things we talked about in our preview episode, we're going against Baylor. We knew that this was a pseudo home game for Gonzaga. It's not a home game. I do not like when people say that this was a home game for Gonzaga. It's not. This is a neutral site game, just happens to be very close to Gonzaga's campus. This is how it's treated at other places. Later this week, Auburn is playing Houston at the Toyota Center where the Houston Rockets play. That's in the same city. Nobody's talking about it as it being a home game for Houston because it's not at the Frittata Center where they play. This should not be treated as a home game either. I feel very strongly about that, but I commend Scott Drew for being willing to play in Spokane on his first day of the season. Seriously, hats off to him for being willing to do that on a team that has 4 new starters. And one of their key returners, Langston Love, he did not play in this game. Those were factors working against Baylor. New team, 4 new starters, hostile road environment in your first game of the season. We knew that that might be a challenge for this Baylor team. They really didn't look the part in this game. And I think a lot of that should be credited to Gonzaga's defense. Baylor shot 37% from the field in this game. Baylor shot 14% from 3. They were 3 of 21. In fact, Jalen Celestine, who is the transfer from Cal, who shot 44% from 3 for the Bears last year, he shot 2 of 5 from 3 off the bench for Baylor. The rest of their team was 1 of 16 from 3. That is atrocious. Jeremy Roach hit 1. Jaden Nunn, VJ Edgecombe, Norchad Omier combined to miss 10. 0 of 10 for them. Rob Wright, the freshman, who was very good in this game off the bench, he was 0 of 2. This team could not hit the broadside of a barn from the three-point line. Some of that was just open shots they missed. Some of that was Gonzaga playing really good defense. And I think that the fact that the defense was so underappreciated coming into the season, this game was clear proof that it needs to be better. Yes, some of this is Baylor's team being disjointed and having not played together. And you could see Jeremy Roach threw passes out of bounds sometimes. Like there were some clear issues that Scott Drew's team needs to work out. This works in Gonzaga's favor because I think ultimately Baylor is going to finish the season as a top 10 team. They're going to be a highly regarded team in the metrics, and it's going to be a really good-looking win for Gonzaga at the end of the season. But I think a lot of what happened on Monday is not just Baylor being disjointed. It is Gonzaga being a significantly better defensive team than they were given credit for. Michael Ajayi is a menace. He is a menace. And Pepperdine's team was so bad defensively that it was hard to tell if he was any good, but he looked great. Caleb Battle was a menace as well. And the main thing, the key factor here goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of the show. Gonzaga has more depth this year, which means that they can play at a more frenetic pace. They can get out and go. They can run up and down the floor with reckless abandon because they know that they have the depth behind them. Ryan knows that he doesn't have to play 45 minutes if the game goes into overtime. They know that there are other players on this roster who can fill those roles, that Caleb can handle the point guard duties in a pinch if you need him to, that Michael can come off the bench and play a valuable role. Graham knows if he gets a little too aggressive that Braden Huff can come in and fill that role in the front court. We didn't see much of Emmanuel Innocente in this game, but we know he can contribute. Ismaila Diani scored points in this game. He actually looked pretty good for being really raw in his first couple performances. I don't think Gonzaga is going to rely on him this year, but he's there. He's there in a situation. Jun Sukio hit a nice shot. He looked pretty good too. This team has tremendous depth, and that allows the starters to play faster, to play more physical, to play aggressively on defense. They're not trying to pick up a bunch of early fouls, and they didn't in this game. They did a good job of avoiding that. But they played aggressive defensively at a level they didn't last year. And it showed up in a major way in this game. Baylor's a work in progress, but folks, Gonzaga looks really good. And the way they played on both sides of the ball, this looks like a top 3 team in the country, and they may not be third. So what's next for Gonzaga? Well, they got Arizona State on the 10th, Sunday, November 10th in the afternoon. I think it's a 2 p.m. tip in the Pacific time zone for that one. Arizona State plays on Tuesday, so if you want to watch them get in their first game action before they take on Gonzaga, they will play at home against Idaho State on Tuesday. And Arizona State played an exhibition game against Duke and looked horrendous. They got absolutely spanked by Duke in that exhibition game. It's an exhibition game. We don't want to take it too seriously. But this Arizona State team, kind of similar to Baylor in some ways. They have a bunch of new starters, very unique roster construction that I'm curious how it's going to work for them. Bobby Hurley, the coach there, of course, the brother of Dan Hurley, the UConn head coach. I'm really interested to see. I don't think this Arizona State team is going to be very good, and I think Gonzaga is going to pick up another monster win here against a Big 12 team, have two 25-point-plus victories under their belt to start the season. That's a fun way to get the year going. They got Long Beach State after that, then they got San Diego State on the 18th, and then you start getting into the battle for Atlantis and the rest of their incredible non-conference schedule. But wanted to leave some room to talk about some of the concerns we saw in this game, but we didn't have to leave much. I mentioned Dusty Stromer making a few bad passes. That's just something you clean up with them. That might just be Mark Few kind of yelling some sense into him, like, hey, you got to be crisper with those passes. If you're not sure what you're doing with the basketball, don't get in the air. Like those kind of things that you just clean up. It's the first game of his sophomore year. He's barely older than a freshman. I'm not too concerned about that, especially considering the rest of the stuff that we saw from him. Like we mentioned, Graham Ike missed some bunnies, but I'm not really worried about that either. He looked great in the second half. A few shots blocked. I think he's got to work on some physicality. Maybe he's just getting back into game shape, but not something that's overly concerning me. Gonzaga also wasn't very great from the free throw line in this game. If you want to get a little nitpicky, 8 of 13, which is only 61.5%. Now, granted, Graham Ike was 3 of 6 on a uncharacteristically off night for him. Ike shot 78% from the free throw line last year, so to go 3 of 6 was a bit alarming, but again, we're talking about a one-game sample size here. The rest of Gonzaga's team was 5 of 7. So one player having one bad night from the free throw line is not something to get overly concerned about. But the fact that we're bringing it up is proof that there's just not a lot of bad things to talk about from this incredible jaw-dropping, putting the entire college basketball world on notice type of performance from Mark Few's team on Monday. Well, it's going to wrap up our conversation about this Baylor game for now. I'm sure we'll get back to it later in this week, probably just throughout the season. I'm sure we'll want to reference what happened in this game, but I want to move on now to talk about Lisa Fortier's team. They start the season Tuesday night against Montana. How are the Lady Zags shaping up this year? Who are some new faces to talk about? We're going to discuss that and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you're going to feel your best the next day. Here's how to use. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get yourself a good night's sleep. And step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Right now, go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off. All right, folks, closing out the show today, getting you ready for Lisa Fortier and the Gonzaga women's basketball team's first game of the season, Tuesday night, November 5th, 6 p.m. Pacific time at the McCarthy Athletic Center. The game will be on ESPN Plus, taking on the Montana Grizzlies. Little election night distraction for you all since Gonzaga's men's team's not playing on Tuesday. We got some women's basketball to watch. It's going to be a fun opener for the Lady Zags. This is a regular game for them. It's now the 6th year in a row that they are playing Montana in the non-conference slate. Montana has been a consistently good team in the Big Sky. And one thing I love about women's basketball in particular, they're not afraid to play true home-and-home series. Gonzaga played Montana at Montana last year. And I'm not saying this to trash Mark Few or anything like that, but it's not going to happen on the men's side, nor should it. I understand why it doesn't, but it's fun that it happens on the women's side. I'm glad that Lisa Fortier's team went and played Montana at Montana, and now they get to host them at the Kennel again tonight here, Tuesday night, 6 p.m. The Zags beat them last year. They went on the road, won by 13. Caitlin Trung had 19.6 assists in that one. Yvonne Ejim had 17 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. So we saw some great performances against this team, but this Montana team is good. They were 23-10 last year. They were 13-5 in the Big Sky, which was 3rd place in that conference. And they're returning 3 key pieces from last year's team. Matt Koenig, 11.5 points, 2.8 assists last year for the Grizzlies. Danny Barch, 7.9 points, 10.5 rebounds. So a really good rebounder for this team. MJ Bruno is back as well, 6 points, 4.9 rebounds. They also added some key players in the transfer portal. Tyler McClimate Call from Stephen F. Austin. Redshirt junior Isabella Zingaro from Iowa State. Iowa State, a program that is phenomenal at women's basketball and men's basketball. They're really peaking right now. And then a sophomore from Xavier, Abby Schubert. So this team's got some high major talent, joining a trio of returners who were big players for this team last year. So there's some intrigue in this opening night matchup for Gonzaga, especially because we talked about this with Baylor on the men's side, losing 4 of your 5 starters. That's the case for Gonzaga's team here. Lisa Fortier's team, Yvonne Ejim is back, and if you're going to pick one of those 5 starters to be back for you the next year, you want the Becky Hammond mid-major player of the year coming back, and that was Yvonne. She was the best mid-major player in college basketball. Should have been an All-American. I was a little disappointed she did not get named to those teams, but she's back for her 5th year, going to be a monster for this team in the paint. And they added some really significant talent around her. Yes, the Trung twins are gone. Yes, Eliza Hollingsworth's gone. Yes, Brenna Maxwell is gone. Those are your 4 starters last year who are all out the door. Worth mentioning, they do return Maud Hybens, who was the 6th woman of the year last year. She's going to play a fantastic role, either starting alongside Yvonne in the front court or maybe still coming off the bench. We'll see. I suspect she's probably going to be in that starting lineup. But they also had Taylor Dalton, friend of the podcast. She came on earlier this summer, transfer from St. Mary's, was a 4-year starter for the Gales, now playing for Gonzaga. That's always fun to have that going on for your team. So Taylor Dalton's in the mix. McKinley Dallin transfers from Minnesota. Inez Betancourt transfers from UConn. Always good to get players from that tremendous UConn women's basketball team. Vera Guyaidin transfers in from a junior college in Georgia. They also have some freshmen coming in. Lauren Whitaker was with the team for about half the year last year. A superstar freshman from New Zealand pairing up with Taylor Dalton, who is also from New Zealand. Allie Turner, freshman from St. Louis, really talented player, has been getting a lot of praise from the coaching staff and the players for her performances throughout the preseason and the exhibitions. Cristobal Alcerobo is a freshman coming in as well. So lots of new talent, lots of new faces. You got some other players who are going to step into bigger roles. Esther Little. We'll see about the health of Bree Sallenbien. If she's healthy, that's a big piece for this team as well. But going to be a fun year. Montana's a good quality test for them to play in the first game of the season. The Lady Zags were picked to finish first in the WCC, which isn't normally a surprise, although the fact that the conference added Oregon State, who was an Elite Eight team last year, and Wazoo, who was ranked at times last year, did make it a little bit more of a question. Now, Oregon State lost almost all of the players from that Elite Eight team. It was really sad to see that happen. What happened to the Pac-12 and conference realignment in general, it doesn't just impact football or even men's basketball. It impacts other sports. And the death of the Pac-12 women's basketball, which was such a dominant league with Stanford and Oregon and UCLA and Oregon State and so on and so forth. Such a good league, and it's disappointing to see it end and to see Oregon State, a proud program that had a lot of success and momentum, get their roster absolutely crushed was disappointing, not just for Oregon State, but for Gonzaga as well, who would have liked a little bit more competition in the WCC. But I still think Oregon State and Washington State are going to be the two next best teams in this league behind Gonzaga, and they're going to add some added challenges for this team. But for now, the focus is Montana. We'll see what this Lady Zag team looks like. I think it's going to be a really fun game on Tuesday evening. It's going to wrap it up for me today, folks. Really excited about Wednesday's show. Got a really fun interview lined up for you all. It's going to be fantastic. Then we got some more previews, and then we're getting you ready for Arizona State, and we're just all the way in it. We got previews, reviews. We got more conversation about realignment and what's going on with these Pac-12 schools as we get closer and closer to that day in 2026. We got recruiting talk as it comes up, all sorts of fun stuff coming your way. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Happy opening day. Happy 1-0 for the Gonzaga program. Cannot wait to stick with you here for the next 22 weeks until a champion is crowned. Hopefully that is a championship trophy coming back to Spokane. Thanks again for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.